The bathroom door was still closed when I picked up Sarah's phone to fix the cracked screen she'd been complaining about for weeks. That's when I saw them. Message after message between my wife and someone named Derek, planning exactly how to get me out of our house so he could move in. The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. Sarah had been meeting with her parents, mapping out legal strategies to have me evicted from my own home. She'd already consulted attorneys about filing domestic violence charges against me, even though I'd never laid a finger on her in anger. The messages detailed everything from custody arrangements to moving schedules, all revolving around one central goal: erasing me from the life we'd built together. I'm Cato, 32 years old, and I work as an electrician for Patterson Electric here in Riverside, California. Sarah and I have been married for 8 years, and we have 2 incredible kids who mean everything to me. Emma just turned 6 and has this amazing talent for drawing these elaborate pictures that cover our entire refrigerator. Jake is 4, and already showing signs that he might follow in my footsteps, with tools always wanting to help when I'm fixing things around the house. Sarah works in marketing for a mid-sized tech company downtown, pulling in decent money that supplements my electrician's salary nicely. We've never been rich, but we've been comfortable. Our 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood has been our sanctuary for the past 5 years. I coach Jake's little league team on weekends, and every evening after dinner, Emma and I work on her art projects at the kitchen table, while Jake builds elaborate structures with his blocks. But something had shifted in our marriage over the past few months. Sarah had grown distant, cold even. She'd come home from work and immediately disappear into her home office, claiming she had urgent projects. Our conversations became limited to logistics about the kids and household responsibilities. When I'd try to initiate intimacy or even basic affection, she'd find excuses or simply turn away. I'd attributed her behavior to work stress. Her company had been going through reorganization, and she'd mentioned several times that her job security felt uncertain. Looking back now, I realize how naive I'd been. Every sign was there, but I'd chosen to see the best in the woman I loved, rather than acknowledge the painful truth unfolding right in front of me. The phone repair should have been simple. Sarah had dropped her device in the parking lot at work, creating a spiderweb of cracks across the screen. She'd handed it to me Thursday evening, asking if I could fix it over the weekend. I'd ordered the replacement screen online and planned to tackle the repair Saturday morning while she was getting her hair done. But when I powered up the phone to test the repair notification, after notification flooded the screen. Text messages from Derek. The name meant nothing to me initially, but as I scrolled through the conversation, my world began crumbling around me. The lawyer says we can file the restraining order petition, near to us, one message read. Your dad's connections at the courthouse should expedite the process. Sarah's response made my blood run cold. Perfect. Cato won't know what hit him. Once he's out, you can start moving your things in gradually. The kids will adjust once they see how much better life can be. Derek had replied with detailed logistics about timing. I'll keep my apartment through the end of the month just in case, but honestly, this feels like destiny. We should have never let your parents talk us out of staying together in college. College. This Derek was Sarah's ex-boyfriend from college. The one her parents had always preferred over me because he came from money and had ambitions beyond working with his hands. Sarah had mentioned him occasionally over the years, always in passing, usually when her mother would make some comment about the one who got away during family gatherings. I kept reading, my hands trembling as the full scope of their conspiracy unfolded. They'd been meeting at the downtown Marriott for the past 3 months. Sarah had convinced her parents that I was becoming increasingly unstable, drinking too much and showing signs of aggression toward her and the children. None of it was true, but the messages showed they'd been building a case systematically. The bathroom door opened and I heard Sarah's footsteps approaching. I quickly closed the messages and set the phone aside, my heart hammering against my ribs. She emerged from the bathroom wrapped in her terry cloth robe, hair still damp from the shower. "Did you get the screen fixed?" she asked, not quite making eye contact. "Yeah, good as new." I managed my voice somehow steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. She picked up the phone and immediately began typing, probably messaging Derek about something else they needed to coordinate for my destruction. The casual way she operated as if planning to destroy someone's life was just another item on her daily checklist chilled me to the bone. That evening, I waited until Emma and Jake were tucked into bed before approaching the conversation I never imagined I'd need to have. Sarah was in the living room, laptop open, presumably working on one of those urgent projects that had been keeping her so busy lately, more likely coordinating additional details with Derek or her parents. "We need to talk," I said, settling into the armchair across from the couch where she sat. Sarah glanced up from her screen and I caught something flickering across her face. Fear, maybe, or calculation. About what I'm really swamped with this campaign launch. About Derek. About your plans to file false charges against me. About how you're going to kick me out of my own house so your ex-boyfriend can move in. The color drained from her face, but only for a moment. Then something hardened in her expression, something I'd never seen before. "I don't know what you're talking about." I saw the messages, Sarah. All of them. The hotel meetings, the legal consultations, the way you've been painting me as some kind of monster to justify what you're doing. She closed the laptop and set it aside, her movements deliberate and controlled. "Fine. You want to do this now? Let's do this." The Sarah who emerged in that moment was someone I didn't recognize. Gone was any pretense of the woman I'd fallen in love with, replaced by someone calculating and cold. Our marriage has been dead for years, Cato. We both know it. We're just going through the motions for the kids, but even they can sense the tension. Derek reaching out 6 months ago was like waking up from a coma. He reminded me what it feels like to be truly wanted, truly appreciated. 6 months. The timeline hit me like a physical blow. You've been planning this for 6 months. Derek and I have a history that goes back 15 years. We understood each other in ways you never could. He's successful, ambitious, driven. He can provide opportunities for Emma and Jake that you'll never be able to give them. Private schools, summer camps in Europe, college funds that actually matter. Each word was chosen to wound, and they found their marks with surgical precision. So, this is about money, about status. It's about potential, Cato. It's about not settling for mediocrity when something better is available. Derek owns 3 successful real estate developments in Orange County. He drives a car that costs more than you make in 2 years. When we go out to dinner, he doesn't check the prices on the menu before ordering. The cruelty in her voice was breathtaking. This woman had shared my bed, raised my children, built a life with me, and now she was dismantling everything with the cold efficiency of a demolition crew. And the charges you're planning to file? The lies about me being violent or unstable? Sarah's laugh was bitter and sharp. My parents have connections throughout this county, Cato. Family court judges, police commissioners, city council members. They've been building relationships in this community since before you were born. Who do you think people will believe, the daughter of Robert and Margaret Whitman, or some blue-collar electrician with a tempers? I don't have a temper. I've never raised my voice to you, let alone my hand. That's a matter of perspective, isn't it? She reached for her phone and began swiping through screens. I've been documenting our interactions for weeks, Cato. Recording conversations, taking notes about your behavior patterns. She hit play on an audio file and I heard my own voice distorted and edited. I'm tired of this. Sick of pretending. If you think I'm just going to walk away, you don't know me at all. I'll fight for what's mine. The clips were taken from various conversations, spliced together and stripped of context to create a narrative of aggression that never existed. What she'd played back was me talking about fighting for our marriage during one of our bedroom conversations weeks ago, edited to sound threatening. You've been recording me. I've been protecting myself and my children from what you're becoming. Derek has been helping me understand the patterns of emotional abuse, how subtle it can be, how it escalates over time. The gaslighting was so complete, so expertly executed, that for a moment I wondered if I was losing my mind. But then I thought about Emma's drawings on the refrigerator, about Jake's excitement, when I helped him learn to tie his shoes, about the gentle way I'd always interacted with both my wife and children. This is insane, Sarah. Whatever problems we have in our marriage, we can work through them. We have 2 children who love both their parents. The children will be fine. Derek is wonderful with kids. He's already talking about adoption procedures once our divorce is finalized. Adoption. He wants to adopt my children. He wants to give them his name. Cato. The Whitman name carries weight in this community, but Derek's last name opens doors that your name never could. Thompson Henderson, whatever Derek's last name is, it doesn't matter. What matters is that Emma and Jake will have opportunities. I realized she didn't even know Derek's last name. After 6 months of planning to destroy our family for this man, she was so focused on what he represented financially that she'd never bothered to learn basic details about who he actually was as a person. Sarah, listen to yourself. You're talking about erasing me from my children's lives for someone whose last name you don't even know. I know enough. I know he can provide security and stability that you never could. I know my parents approve of him, which they never did with you. And I know that staying in this marriage would be settling for less than I deserve. What about what Emma and Jake deserve? What about their relationship with their father? They'll have a better father figure in Derek than they ever had in you. Children are resilient, Cato. They adapt. The conversation continued for another hour, each exchange revealing new layers of betrayal and calculation. By the time we went to bed sleeping on opposite sides of a divide that felt as vast as an ocean, I understood that the woman I'd married either no longer existed or had never existed at all. The next morning brought a new level of warfare that I hadn't anticipated. Sarah left for work early, claiming an urgent meeting, but not before kissing Emma and Jake goodbye with an extra tenderness that now seemed performative. I was getting ready for my own day when my phone rang. Tom, Sarah's younger brother, was calling from his job at the county planning office. "Hey, Cato, I need to give you a heads up about something. Mom called me last night and she was really upset. She's telling everyone that you've been threatening Sarah, that you might be drinking too much, that Sarah's afraid you might hurt her or the kids." Tom and I had always gotten along well. He'd never bought into his parents' disapproval of my working-class background, and he'd been genuinely happy when Sarah and I got married. His warning came from a place of concern rather than accusation. "None of that is true, Tom. I don't know what Sarah's told your mother, but I've never threatened anyone, and I certainly don't have a drinking problem." I figured there was more to the story. But Cato, she's called everyone. Uncle Frank, Aunt Linda, Cousin Michael, even Sarah's grandmother. She's painting a picture of a marriage that's turned dangerous, saying Sarah needs family support to protect herself and the kids. The systematic nature of the character assassination became clear. Margaret wasn't just supporting her daughter's affair, she was actively participating in the destruction of my reputation throughout their extended family network. "Has anyone else called you about this?" "Not yet, but Mom mentioned that Sarah was going to reach out to people from your work, maybe some of the other parents from Emma's school. She's really building a case here, Cato." After hanging up with Tom, I tried to focus on work, but concentration proved impossible. Around 10 in the morning, my boss Randy called me into his office at the Patterson Electric headquarters. Randy was a fair man who'd hired me straight out of my apprenticeship program 7 years earlier. He'd watched me work my way up from basic residential wiring to complex commercial installations, and we'd developed mutual respect over the years. "Cato, I got a strange phone call this morning from someone claiming to be your wife. She was asking questions about your work performance, whether you've been drinking, whether any tools or materials have gone missing from job sites." My stomach dropped. "What did you tell her?" "I told her that employee information is confidential, and that if she had specific concerns, she should discuss them with you directly. But I'm telling you because the whole thing struck me as odd. Is everything all right at home?" I gave Randy a brief overview of the situation without going into excessive detail. He listened carefully, occasionally nodding in understanding. "I've seen this kind of thing before, Cato. Divorce can bring out the worst in people, especially when money and custody are involved. For what it's worth, Your work record speaks for itself. You're reliable, skilled, and honest. If someone tries to suggest otherwise, I'll set them straight. But the damage was already spreading beyond my workplace. When I picked up Emma and Jake from their after-school program that afternoon, Mrs. Rodriguez, the program coordinator, pulled me aside. "Mr. Johnson, I received a concerning call today from someone claiming to represent your family. They were asking about Emma and Jake's behavior, whether they've mentioned any problems at home, whether they seem fearful or anxious." Emma's teacher had received a similar call. The school principal had been contacted by someone claiming to be conducting a welfare check on behalf of Child Protective Services, though when the principal called CPS directly, they had no record of any investigation. By the time I got the kids home, fed them dinner, and helped them with their homework, the scope of Sarah's campaign was becoming clear. She wasn't just planning to leave me, she was systematically destroying my reputation in every sphere of my life. To ensure that when the legal proceedings began, I'd be fighting an uphill battle against a carefully constructed narrative of instability and potential violence. That's when I decided to come home early the next day, curious about how Sarah was spending her time when she thought I was safely at work. What I discovered in my own driveway changed everything. Derek's BMW sat in the spot where I usually parked my truck. Through the living room window, I could see a man I'd never met before, sitting on my couch playing a board game with my children, while Sarah watched with an expression of pure adoration. Derek appeared to be in his mid-30s, well-dressed in expensive casual clothes, with the kind of confident posture that comes from financial security. He was engaging Emma and Jake with animated enthusiasm, making them laugh in ways that twisted my heart into knots. I watched through the window as Derek presented Emma with an elaborate art set complete with professional-grade colored pencils and a hard-bound sketchbook. Jake received a remote-controlled helicopter that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. The children's excitement was genuine and immediate. Sarah was introducing him as Mommy's special friend, explaining that Derek was going to be spending more time with their family. Emma, always articulate for her age, asked Derek questions about where he lived and what kind of work he did. His answers were clearly rehearsed, designed to impress both the children and any adults who might be listening. "I build houses and buildings for families," Derek told Jake. "Big, beautiful houses with swimming pools and game rooms." "Bigger than our house?" Jake asked, his eyes wide with 6-year-old wonder. "Much bigger. I'm working on a house right now that has its own movie theater inside." Emma looked skeptical. "That sounds make-believe." Derek laughed and pulled out his phone, showing her pictures of luxury homes he claimed to have built. "Sometimes real life is even better than make-believe." I stood in my own front yard watching a stranger win over my children with expensive gifts and grand promises while my wife facilitated the introduction. The violation felt complete and devastating. But instead of confronting them immediately, something in me shifted toward calculation rather than emotion. If Sarah wanted to play games with evidence and documentation, I could learn to play those games too. I pulled out my own phone and began recording everything I could see and hear through the window. Derek's car license plate clearly visible. The interaction with my children. Sarah's body language and obvious comfort with having this man in our home while I was supposedly at work. After 20 minutes of observation, I quietly returned to my truck and drove to a coffee shop where I could think clearly about what I'd witnessed and what it meant for the battle ahead. Instead of driving home and creating a confrontation that would only serve Sarah's narrative, I called Marcus Thompson, my old military buddy who'd moved to California 5 years ago and now worked as a private investigator. Marcus and I had served together in Afghanistan, and he understood the importance of gathering intelligence before engaging the enemy. "I need your help with something personal," I told him over the phone. "It's about my marriage and it's complicated." We met at a diner near his office in downtown Riverside, and I laid out everything I'd discovered over the past few days. Marcus listened without interruption, occasionally taking notes in a small notebook he carried everywhere. "What you're describing is a coordinated campaign," Marcus said when I finished. "This isn't just a woman having an affair. This is someone who's been coached probably by family members with legal experience on how to systematically destroy your credibility before filing for divorce. That's exactly what it feels like. But I don't understand why it has to be so elaborate. If she wants a divorce, she can have one. I'm not going to fight her on that. It's about custody and assets, Cato. If she can prove you're unfit or dangerous, she gets primary custody of the kids and probably the house. If the divorce is just about irreconcilable differences, you get joint custody, and she has to split everything down the middle. Marcus explained that California's no-fault divorce laws actually protected people in situations like mine, but false allegations of domestic violence or substance abuse could override those protections. Sarah's strategy was designed to circumvent fair division of assets by making me appear unsuitable as a custodial parent. "What do you know about this Derek character?" Marcus asked. "Nothing beyond his first name and the fact that he drives an expensive car. Sarah dated him in college, and her parents apparently approved of him back then. Let me run some searches. If he's as successful as he claims, there should be public records about his business dealings, property ownership, maybe court filings if he's been divorced before." Marcus spent the next hour working on his laptop while I nursed coffee and tried to process the surreal turn my life had taken. The man I'd trusted to watch my back in combat situations was now helping me navigate a different kind of battlefield, one where the enemy slept in my bed and knew all my vulnerabilities. "Found him," Marcus announced, turning his laptop screen toward me. "Derek Patterson, 34 years old, owns Patterson Development Group based in Newport Beach. 3 luxury housing projects completed in the past 5 years, currently working on a 4th. The business credentials appeared impressive, but Marcus kept digging deeper into public records and court filings. "This is interesting," he said after another 20 minutes. "Derek's been divorced twice in the past 8 years. Both divorces involved allegations of infidelity, and both ex-wives received substantial settlements. So he has a pattern of cheating. More than that, look at this timeline. His first marriage ended when his wife discovered he was having affairs with 2 different married women simultaneously. The second marriage lasted only 18 months before his wife caught him with someone else." But Marcus had discovered something even more significant buried in recent federal court filings. Cato Derek's company is currently under investigation by the FBI for mortgage fraud. The case hasn't been widely reported yet, but the investigation has been ongoing for 8 months. They're looking at whether his developments were used to inflate property values and defraud elderly homeowners who were pressured into refinancing based on false appraisals. So he's potentially facing criminal charges, federal criminal charges. If convicted, he could be looking at serious prison time and financial ruin, which might explain why he's suddenly interested in reconnecting with an old girlfriend who comes from a wealthy, well-connected family. The pieces began falling into place. Derek wasn't just pursuing Sarah out of renewed romantic interest. He was potentially seeking a safe harbor from legal troubles that could destroy his business and reputation. Sarah's family connections and her father's standing in the community would provide valuable protection and legitimacy if Derek's legal situation became public. "There's more." Marcus continued pulling up additional documents. "Derek's company has been borrowing heavily against future projects to fund current operations. If the federal investigation results in frozen assets or criminal charges, the whole business could collapse overnight. Does Sarah know about any of this? From what you've told me about their conversations, it doesn't sound like she's done much investigation beyond being impressed by his current lifestyle. She probably has no idea she's being pursued by someone who might be facing financial and legal catastrophe." Marcus printed out relevant documents and organized them in a folder for me to review. "The question now is what you want to do with this information. You could confront Sarah directly, but that might just accelerate their timeline. Or you could take a more strategic approach." "What kind of strategic approach?" "Think about who has the most to lose if Sarah's family becomes associated with someone under federal investigation for fraud. Her father's business reputation, her mother's social standing, their political connections throughout the county." Marcus was right. Robert and Margaret Whitman had spent decades building their reputation in Riverside County. Robert's car dealerships were successful, partly because of his reputation for honesty and community involvement. Margaret served on several nonprofit boards and was active in social circles where reputation meant everything. You think they don't know about Derek's legal troubles? I'd bet money they don't. And I'd bet even more money that if they found out, their support for this whole plan would evaporate immediately. We spent another hour developing a plan that would present the information in a way that served everyone's best interests, including Emma and Jake. The goal wasn't revenge, it was protection for my children and preservation of whatever family relationships could be salvaged from the wreckage Sarah had created. But first I needed to understand exactly how deep Derek's deception ran, and whether Sarah was a willing participant or another victim of his manipulation. Over the next 3 days, Marcus and I conducted what amounted to a full investigation into Derek Patterson and his business practices. What we discovered painted a picture of a man whose charming exterior concealed a pattern of calculated manipulation that went far beyond simple infidelity. Derek's real estate empire, while impressive on the surface, was built on increasingly desperate financial maneuvering. His company owed over $12 million to various lenders, and several construction projects had been stalled due to contractor complaints about unpaid bills. The FBI investigation centered around allegations that Derek had been inflating property appraisals and pressuring elderly homeowners into unnecessary refinancing deals that enriched his company, while leaving the homeowners vulnerable to foreclosure. But the most disturbing discovery came when Marcus traced Derek's recent romantic history. In addition to his 2 failed marriages, Derek had pursued at least 4 other married women over the past 3 years. Each relationship followed the same pattern: identify a woman in an established marriage who seemed dissatisfied with her circumstances, present himself as a successful alternative, encourage the woman to leave her husband, and then disappear once the divorce proceedings became complicated or expensive. "He's not just a serial cheater," Marcus explained. "He's a predator who targets married women specifically because they represent stability and resources he can exploit while his own world is falling apart." The most recent example was particularly relevant to our situation. 8 months ago, Derek had pursued Linda Garrett, a married mother of 3, whose husband worked as a bank manager in Orange County. Derek had convinced Linda that her marriage was holding her back from achieving her potential, helped her develop a strategy for leaving her husband, and even assisted with finding legal representation. But when Linda's divorce proceedings revealed that her family's assets were more limited than Derek had initially believed, he disappeared without explanation, leaving her isolated from her family and facing an expensive custody battle alone. "Linda's still going through her divorce," Marcus told me. "Her husband thinks she's having some kind of breakdown because she can't explain why she threw away their 15-year marriage for a man who vanished the moment things got complicated." The pattern was clear and chilling. Derek Patterson was not someone who fell in love with married women. He was someone who systematically identified and exploited married women for financial and social advantage, discarding them when they ceased to be useful. "We need to find out if he's running the same game on anyone else right now," I said. Marcus's additional research revealed that Derek was indeed pursuing another married woman in San Bernardino County, using nearly identical tactics to those he'd employed with Sarah. Jessica Martinez was a marketing executive whose husband owned a successful landscaping business. Derek had been meeting with Jessica for 6 weeks, presenting himself as someone who could provide opportunities her current marriage couldn't offer. "The timeline suggests he's running multiple operations simultaneously," Marcus observed. "If one target doesn't work out, he always has backup options." This information fundamentally changed my understanding of Sarah's situation. While her willingness to betray our marriage was inexcusable, it appeared she was also being systematically manipulated by someone with extensive experience in psychological manipulation. But Marcus had uncovered an even more immediate concern. Through his contacts in federal law enforcement, he'd learned that the FBI investigation into Derek's business practices was approaching a critical phase. Federal agents were preparing to execute search warrants and potentially make arrests within the next 2 to 3 weeks. If Derek knows the timeline, and he probably does through his legal representation, then he's operating under serious time pressure. Marcus explained. He needs to establish himself in a new situation with access to resources and social protection before the investigation becomes public knowledge. So Sarah and her family connections represent more than just romantic opportunity for him. Exactly. Robert Whitman's reputation in the business community, his political connections, his established relationships with local law enforcement and judiciary. If Derek can position himself as a member of that family before his legal troubles become public, he gains access to resources that could help him weather the storm. The manipulation was even more calculated than I'd initially realized. Derek wasn't just stealing my wife. He was positioning himself to use my entire family's resources and reputation as protection against federal prosecution. But we also discovered something that could work in my favor. Robert Whitman's business success was built partly on political relationships and partly on his reputation for integrity within the local business community. His car dealerships held contracts with several city and county agencies for fleet vehicles, contracts that required vendors to maintain clean legal records and positive community standing. If Robert becomes associated with someone under federal investigation for fraud, those contracts could be in jeopardy, Marcus pointed out. We're talking about potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars in annual revenue for his dealerships. Moreover, Margaret Whitman's social standing depended heavily on her family's reputation for respectability and community involvement. Her position on nonprofit boards, her influence in various social organizations, even her friendships within their affluent social circle could be compromised if her family became connected to someone facing federal criminal charges. The beautiful thing about this situation, Marcus concluded, is that you don't need to convince them to choose between you and Derek. You just need to give them accurate information about who Derek really is, and they'll make the right decision for their own protection. But presenting that information required careful strategy. A direct confrontation with accusations and evidence would likely trigger defensive reactions and force them to choose sides. Instead, we needed an approach that allowed them to discover the truth in a way that made them feel they were protecting their family rather than abandoning Sarah's romantic interests. Robert Whitman is a businessman, Marcus observed. If you approach him as someone bringing important business intelligence rather than someone fighting about a personal dispute, he'll be more likely to listen objectively to what you have to say. The plan we developed was simple and direct. I would request a private meeting with Robert at his office, present the information about Derek's legal and financial troubles as a concerned family member trying to protect everyone involved, and allow Robert to draw his own conclusions about the implications for his family's interests. The key is positioning yourself as the responsible adult in this situation, Marcus advised. You're not there to argue about your marriage or to attack Derek personally. You're there to share information that any responsible person would want to know before welcoming someone into their family. Saturday morning arrived with crisp autumn air that reminded me of better times when Sarah and I would take the kids to the farmer's market and spend lazy afternoons working in our small garden. Instead, I was preparing for what might be the most important conversation of my adult life. Robert Whitman's main dealership was located on a busy commercial strip that showcased his success over the past 20 years. Whitman Automotive had grown from a single used car lot to a sprawling complex that included new and used vehicle sales, a service department, and a parts warehouse. On weekends, Robert often worked in his office handling paperwork and planning for the upcoming week. I'd called ahead and asked for 15 minutes of his time to discuss a family matter. Robert had agreed, probably assuming I wanted to discuss some aspect of my deteriorating marriage with Sarah that could be resolved through family mediation. When I arrived at the dealership, Robert was in his office reviewing sales reports. At 58, he maintained the kind of confident bearing that successful businessmen develop over decades of making important decisions. He greeted me cordially but with obvious caution. "Cato, I appreciate you coming by. Sarah mentioned that you two have been going through a rough patch. These things happen in marriages, and sometimes families can help work through the difficulties." I settled into the chair across from his desk and placed Marcus's folder of documents on my lap. "Robert, I need to share some information with you that affects more than just my marriage. It concerns the man Sarah has been seeing and what his presence might mean for your family's reputation and business interests. Robert's expression shifted slightly, becoming more alert and business-focused. Go on. The man Sarah is involved with is Derek Patterson. She knew him in college, and I understand you and Margaret approved of him back then because of his apparent success. But there are aspects of his current situation that I don't think anyone in your family is aware of. I opened the folder and removed the first set of documents Marcus had compiled. Derek's company, Patterson Development Group, is currently under federal investigation for mortgage fraud. The investigation has been ongoing for 8 months, and according to federal court filings, charges could be filed within the next few weeks. Robert's businessman instincts immediately engaged. He took the documents and began reviewing them carefully, his expression growing more serious as he absorbed the details. These are federal court records. Yes, public filings from the Central District of California. The FBI is investigating allegations that Derek's company inflated property values to defraud elderly homeowners who were pressured into refinancing their homes based on false appraisals. I provided additional documents detailing Derek's business debts, the stalled construction projects, and the unpaid contractor claims. Robert studied each page with the careful attention of someone who understood the implications of financial instability and legal jeopardy. Robert, I'm sharing this information because I know how much your business reputation means to you and your family, your relationships with city and county agencies, your standing in the business community, Margaret's position on various boards. If Derek becomes associated with your family and these charges become public, it could affect everything you've worked to build. Does Sarah know about any of this? I don't believe so. From what I've observed, she's been impressed by Derek's current lifestyle and his promises about the future he can provide for her and the kids. But she doesn't seem to be aware of his legal troubles or his financial instability. Robert was quiet for several minutes, continuing to review the documents while processing the implications. When he looked up, his expression had shifted from caution to serious concern. You mentioned this affects more than your marriage. What else should I know? I provided the information about Derek's pattern of pursuing married women, his 2 previous divorces, and the other women he was currently targeting. This wasn't about attacking Derek's character. It was about demonstrating a pattern of behavior that suggested Sarah might be another victim, rather than the beneficiary of genuine romantic interest. Derek has pursued at least 4 married women over the past 3 years, I explained. Each relationship followed the same pattern: identify a dissatisfied wife, present himself as a better alternative, encourage her to leave her husband, and then disappear when the situation becomes complicated, or when he discovers the family doesn't have the resources or connections he hoped to access. Robert's business experience made him particularly attuned to patterns of manipulation and exploitation. You're suggesting that Sarah is being targeted specifically because of our family connections. I think Derek sees your family's reputation and resources as potential protection against his legal troubles. If he can establish himself as a family member before the federal charges become public, he gains access to social and political connections that could help him navigate the legal system. I shared the information about Linda Garrett and Derek's current pursuit of Jessica Martinez. The pattern was clear and consistent. Derek Patterson was not someone who fell in love with married women, but someone who systematically exploited them for personal advantage. Robert, I love my children more than anything in this world. If Sarah genuinely wants to end our marriage, I'll respect that decision and work with her to create the best possible situation for Emma and Jake. But I won't stand by and watch someone use my family as protection against federal prosecution, especially when it puts my children at risk. Robert was quiet again, and I could see him processing not just the information I'd provided, but the implications for his family's future. After several minutes, he reached for his phone. I need to call Margaret and ask her to meet us here immediately. Then I want you to wait while I make some phone calls to verify this information independently. Of course. I understand you need to confirm everything I've told you. It's not that I don't trust you, Cato. It's that the implications are serious enough that I need to be absolutely certain before we take any action. Robert spent the next hour making phone calls to his attorney, his accountant, and several business associates who had connections in federal law enforcement. Each conversation confirmed different aspects of the information Marcus and I had compiled. When Margaret arrived at the dealership, her expression suggested she expected to be mediating a family dispute rather than addressing a potential crisis. Robert briefed her on everything I'd shared, showing her the documents and explaining the connections he'd been able to verify through his own sources. Margaret's initial reaction was disbelief, followed by anger, and finally by the kind of protective instinct that emerges when someone realizes their family is under threat. "We need to call Sarah immediately and get her here," Margaret said. "She needs to understand what she's gotten herself involved in." But Robert was already thinking several steps ahead. "Before we involve Sarah, I want to speak with Derek directly. If he's as manipulative as these patterns suggest, then confronting Sarah first might just give him an opportunity to spin some new story or accelerate whatever timeline he's working under." "What are you thinking?" I asked. "I'm thinking that I want to look this man in the eye and ask him some direct questions about his business situation and his intentions regarding our family. Sarah has already invited him to family dinner tomorrow evening. If he's planning to use our family for protection or resources, then he'll want to establish those relationships as quickly as possible." Margaret looked stricken. "Sarah invited him to family dinner. She didn't mention that to me." "Apparently there's a lot Sarah hasn't mentioned to any of us," Robert replied. "Which is why we need to get ahead of this situation before it spirals beyond our control." The plan that emerged from our conversation was straightforward. Robert and Margaret would proceed with the family dinner as scheduled, but they would come prepared with specific questions about Derek's business situation and his long-term intentions. Meanwhile, I would remain available but out of sight, ready to provide additional information if needed. "Cato, I want you to understand something," Robert said as our meeting concluded. "Whatever problems exist between you and Sarah, they're secondary to protecting this family from someone who might be using us for protection against federal prosecution. Sarah is still my daughter, but Emma and Jake are my grandchildren, and I won't let anyone put them at risk." By the time I left the dealership that afternoon, the dynamic had shifted completely. Instead of being isolated and fighting against Sarah's family, I had become an ally in protecting that family against an external threat. But the real test would come the following evening when Derek Patterson found himself answering direct questions from people who knew exactly what kind of legal and financial troubles he was facing. Sunday evening arrived with the kind of tension that precedes storms. Sarah had been excited all day about introducing Derek to her parents at what she described as a casual family dinner. She'd spent the afternoon preparing Derek's favorite dishes and coaching Emma and Jake on how to behave around their guest. I remained at home with the children while Sarah drove to her parents' house for what she expected to be a celebration of her new relationship. She had no idea that Robert and Margaret were now armed with comprehensive information about Derek's legal troubles, financial instability, and pattern of manipulating married women. Around 7 in the evening, my phone rang. It was Robert. "Cato, I need you to come over here immediately. Bring the children. There's something we all need to discuss as a family." The drive to the Whitman house felt surreal. Emma and Jake chattered excitedly in the back seat about seeing their grandparents and meeting Mommy's special friend. They had no understanding of the adult complications that had brought us to this moment. When we arrived, Robert met us at the door with an expression that was both grim and relieved. "The children can play in the living room while we talk in the dining room," he said quietly. "This conversation is going to be difficult, but it's necessary." Inside, I found Sarah sitting at the dining room table, looking pale and shaken. Margaret was beside her, holding her hand in a gesture of support rather than comfort. Derek was nowhere to be seen. "Where's Derek?" I asked. "Gone," Robert said simply, "and he won't be coming back." Robert explained what had transpired during the first hour of the evening. Derek had arrived confident and charming, presenting gifts for Emma and Jake, and engaging Robert and Margaret in conversation about his business success and his plans for the future. I asked him some specific questions about his development projects, Robert continued. About financing, about his relationships with contractors, about his plans for expansion. Normal business questions that any successful developer should be able to answer easily. Derek's responses had been evasive and inconsistent. When Robert asked about specific properties and timelines, Derek provided answers that didn't match information Robert had independently verified earlier that day. Then, I asked him directly about the federal investigation into his company. Derek's reaction had been immediate and revealing. Instead of surprise or confusion, he'd shown anger and accusation, demanding to know who had been investigating him and what right Robert had to interfere in his relationship with Sarah. His mask came off completely, Margaret added. The charming, successful businessman disappeared, and what emerged was someone desperate and manipulative. He started making threats about what would happen if we tried to interfere with his plans. What kind of threats? I asked. He said he had recordings of conversations with Sarah that could be used to prove she was being abused and manipulated by you, Robert replied. He claimed he had evidence that would guarantee Sarah got full custody and complete control of marital assets. But Derek's threatening approach backfired spectacularly when he revealed information that Sarah hadn't known he possessed. He knew details about our family finances, about my business contracts, about Margaret's involvement with various organizations, Robert continued. Information that Sarah never would have shared with someone she'd been dating for a few months. It became clear he'd been researching our family extensively before pursuing Sarah. Sarah spoke for the first time since I'd arrived, her voice shaky but clear. He knew things about Emma's school, about Jake's medical history, about our neighborhood and neighbors. Things I'd never told him. When I asked how he knew those details, he said Sarah had told him everything, but I knew I hadn't shared most of that information with anyone. That's when I confronted him with the federal court documents, Robert said. I told him we knew about the FBI investigation, about his company's financial troubles, about his pattern of pursuing married women. Derek's response revealed the depth of his calculation and desperation. Instead of denying the allegations, he tried to frame them as minor business complications that wouldn't affect his relationship with Sarah or his ability to provide for her family. He actually tried to convince us that federal fraud investigations were normal parts of successful business operations, Margaret said with disgust. He claimed that wealthy developers are always facing scrutiny from jealous competitors and overzealous regulators. But the final revelation came when Derek realized his plan was falling apart, and he needed to accelerate his timeline. He told Sarah that they needed to get married immediately this week before you could interfere with their plans. Robert continued. He said once they were married, he could protect her from any legal complications, and they could weather any temporary business difficulties together. Sarah's realization that she'd been manipulated rather than romanced was devastating and complete. Everything he'd told me about wanting to take care of Emma and Jake, about loving me, about seeing a future together, it was all designed to get access to our family's resources and reputation. When I told him he needed to leave and never contact our family again, he showed his true nature, Robert added. He said he'd already invested too much time and effort in this relationship to walk away empty-handed. He threatened to follow through with the domestic violence allegations against Cato, regardless of whether Sarah supported them. But Derek had underestimated Robert's connections and resources. I told him that my attorney was already prepared to share information about his legal troubles with federal investigators, and that any attempt to file false charges against Cato would result in additional federal charges against him for obstruction of justice. Derek Patterson left the Whitman house that evening, understanding that his plan had not only failed, but that continuing to pursue Sarah or harass her family would result in additional legal jeopardy at a time when he could least afford it. Sarah, I said gently, I need you to understand that I don't see you as a villain in this situation. You were targeted by someone with extensive experience in manipulation, someone who understood exactly what to say and do to make you question our marriage and believe he offered something better. Sarah looked at me with tears streaming down her face. I was so horrible to you. I said things, did things. I destroyed our marriage for someone who was using me. Our marriage had problems before Derek appeared, I replied honestly. We'd grown apart, stopped communicating effectively, stopped making each other feel valued and appreciated. Derek didn't create those problems. He just exploited them. Margaret spoke up quietly. Cato, I owe you an apology. We never gave you the credit you deserved as Sarah's husband and Emma and Jake's father. We were so focused on what we thought Sarah should want that we never appreciated what she actually had. You work hard, you're devoted to your children, you've been faithful and honest throughout this whole nightmare, Robert added. I was wrong to value financial success over character and integrity. The conversation continued for another 2 hours, with Sarah gradually revealing the full extent of Derek's manipulation and the systematic way he'd encouraged her to view our marriage as limiting her potential. She shared recordings Derek had made of their conversations, recordings that revealed his calculated approach to understanding her vulnerabilities and exploiting them. He knew exactly what to say to make me feel like I was settling for less than I deserved, Sarah admitted. But he never actually asked about what I wanted or what made me happy. Every conversation was about what was wrong with my current life, not about what could be right about a future together. As the evening concluded, Robert made an announcement that surprised everyone. Sarah, you and the children are welcome to stay here while you and Cato work through whatever comes next. But I want to be clear, Cato is welcome in this house, and Emma and Jake need their father in their lives regardless of what decisions you and Cato make about your marriage. I'd like to try counseling, Sarah said quietly. I'd like to see if we can rebuild what I nearly destroyed. I understand if you can't forgive me, Cato, but I want to try to become someone worthy of forgiveness. 6 months later, Sarah and I were sitting in our marriage counselor's office working through the last of the trust issues that Derek's manipulation had exposed and exploited. Our marriage wasn't the same as it had been before. It was stronger, built on honest communication and mutual respect, rather than assumptions and unspoken expectations. Derek Patterson was convicted on multiple federal fraud charges and sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. The investigation revealed that he'd defrauded elderly homeowners out of more than $4 million and had targeted numerous married women as potential sources of financial and social protection. Emma and Jake never learned the full details of what had almost happened to our family, but they benefited from parents who had learned to value what we had rather than focus on what we thought we lacked. Robert and Margaret became actively involved grandparents who appreciated the stability and love that Sarah and I provided for our children. The experience taught me that sometimes the greatest strength lies not in fighting harder, but in fighting smarter. By approaching Robert with information rather than accusations, by positioning myself as someone trying to protect the family, rather than someone trying to win an argument, I'd been able to turn potential enemies into allies. Most importantly, I learned that real love sometimes means protecting people from their own poor decisions. Sarah had been vulnerable to Derek's manipulation, partly because of genuine problems in our marriage, but also because she'd been isolated from the information she needed to make informed decisions about her future. Our marriage survived because we both learned to see past our immediate emotions to understand the larger forces that had nearly destroyed our family. Sarah recognized that her dissatisfaction with our marriage didn't justify betrayal and deception. I recognized that my complacency about our relationship had created vulnerabilities that someone like Derek could exploit. Today, Emma is 9 and Jake is 7. They're growing up in a home where their parents communicate openly, work together to solve problems, and value honesty above convenience. Sarah's relationship with her parents has been rebuilt on a foundation of mutual respect rather than financial expectations. Robert and Margaret have learned to appreciate the kind of quiet strength that comes from doing the right thing even when it's difficult. The boxes that Sarah had been packing that terrible Sunday evening were Derek's expensive gifts, which we donated to a local children's charity. The children learned that the most valuable gifts are the ones that can't be bought, trust, integrity, and the kind of love that persists even when it's tested by deception and betrayal. If you've ever felt like your family was under attack from forces beyond your control, I want you to know that sometimes the solution isn't to fight harder, but to fight smarter. Information is more powerful than anger, and truth has a way of protecting people who might not even realize they need protection. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have confronted Derek directly, Or would you have taken the strategic approach of working through Sarah's family? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and share it with others who might benefit from understanding how manipulation works and how families can protect themselves against people who target them for exploitation. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about overcoming challenges through wisdom rather than force. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it reminds you to value the honest relationships in your life while remaining vigilant against those who might seek to exploit your trust for their own gain.